Hello, my name is Carolyn O'Donoghue, and today I would like to present to you my final year project, CowRoo, a first aid mobile application that encourages users to revise their skills for improved recall in emergency situations. In emergency medicine, there is a term called the golden hour. The golden hour is a period in which, if a person is given medical treatment, they have the highest percentage of surviving. In the last 3 years, it has been shown that it takes over 90 minutes for emergency services to arrive at a scene of an incident in Ireland. A study carried out by the Irish Heart Foundation showed that more than 5,000 people went into cardiac arrest in Ireland, with 70% of which happening in the home. The lack of time-critical emergency services are emphasised in counties Carlow, Kilkenny, Wexford, Waterford, which do not even have a cardiology service operated outside business hours. This means that residents in these counties that go into cardiac arrest would be limited to either Cork or Dublin for emergency care. Think about it. In the worst case scenario, it takes at least 2.5 hours to Cork or Dublin. Added on with the 90 minutes before an ambulance arrives, you're talking almost 3.5 hours before someone in cardiac arrest can be potentially treated in hospital. This is even if the patient gets that far. Without first response training, a patient could die within minutes of the incident occurring. People are 10 times more likely to perform CPR if they've already had first aid training. But in studies in the last 10 years, only 5% of Irish people know first aid. This is an astonishing difference in comparison to European countries such as Norway, in which a study carried out showed that 90% of respondents had first aid training and 56% had first aid training that had been done in the last 5 years. Life-threatening situations will affect everyone at some stage in their lifetime. So why is Ireland's first aid knowledge so low, given that most emergencies will require first aid before emergency services arrive? How can we improve these statistics? 6% of Ireland's population is made up of college students. Within these college years, there are multiple resources at hand for students to learn first aid. This can fall due to financial constraints, as first aid courses are expensive, as well as a revision course you must do every 2 years to stay qualified. In my own experience, the University of Limerick facilitated my first aid training, but was not able to help me or other students carry out revision classes. This meant when I was faced with a situation in which I needed to carry out first aid, I had forgotten most of it. This left me frustrated and as if the training was wasted. This is where my thought process began with this project. As a design student, I wondered whether there were ways that HCI could help improve this problem. I formed my research question: how can technology support first aid responders in revising their knowledge before emergencies occur while also encouraging connections with others? Carrying out this project, my goal was to create a high-fidelity prototype that could support first aid revision and in turn provide improved information recall when emergencies occurred. Beginning with academic research, my readings in several different areas, I was able to explore 5 key themes. By firstly exploring historical practices of first aid, it was revolved around illustrations, stories, and community-based learning to help wounded in wartime. Practices drastically improved by medical discoveries and publications. For example, Frederick von Esmark, who coined the phrase Erste Hilfe for first aid. His publications on hygiene practices, cardiac resuscitation, and artificial respiration paved the road forward for modern first aid teaching. And practices haven't changed. The fundamental principles of first aid remain the same: preventing more harm, reducing more risks in emergency areas, minimizing pain for patients and stabilizing their condition, maintaining a composure of reassurance during emergencies, and preventing harm upon oneself. But without constant revision training, this becomes irrelevant. Studies show that the practical first aid skills rapidly decline after training, and that revision and retraining should be done much sooner than 2 to 3 years. The more revision done, the more people feel confident to act. Quoting a famous quote by Einstein, "The only source of knowledge is experience." In recent times, augmented reality and virtual reality, due to their immersive experiences, have provided huge benefits for teaching environments and improved information recall that has reduced response time issues in emergencies. Wearables have provided a way to collect information from patients in order to give accurate treatment, and through mobile applications, databases have been created for patient and carers that can be used by emergency services. With the potential of a mobile application for my final design, I explored 4 different first aid applications already on the market: St. John's Ambulance, Red Cross, Citizens Aid, and Good Sam. The key takeaways from this was first aid information must be accurate. It must be provided through a step-by-step revision process, but it also must motivate users to continue to revisit the application. Must be personalized for the user. The application must hold the user's attention and be able to track progress, but also be able to connect with others. This is when I began my field studies. As a student myself and understanding the issues that face first aid revision resources, I wanted to explore further. I began my field studies by reaching out to friends and family through social media platforms, Facebook and Instagram. When asked about situations they'd encountered, most of them were able to recall certain techniques, but admitted most of the information hadn't stuck. I was lucky to have the opportunity to make a fly-in-the-wall study of a first aid course being facilitated on campus. It was interesting to hear from students who were open to share some situations they had dealt with in their own lives regarding first aid emergencies and stories shared with friends. I consciously made observations through everyday life on campus. I was surprised to discover that 15 buildings on campus, only 7 of the buildings had first aid kits available. Within the university itself, approximately 60 staff members that had first aid training, and there's only 22 AED kits available, but from my own observations, these were not obvious. Students I asked were aware of the first aid kits located on campus, but also assumed that these were just for staff members. I also carried out one-to-one interviews with 10 students. There were 4 main reflections from this process. I was pleasantly surprised by the number of participants who felt confident to act in first aid emergencies. While interviewing novice first responders, they didn't make any mention of preparedness should an accident occur. In a situation, they spoke about panic they felt and how their instant reaction was to call for help for someone who was more prepared, a parent, a family member, a colleague. Students found it easier to deal with situations that didn't involve family members. More than half of participants recalled that if the experience hadn't happened, they most likely would not have been able to recall their skills as clearly. Then began my design process, which involved a co-design workshop with students. This was facilitated by myself in 4 main parts. To familiarize the students on the topic of first aid, I began with a post-it note session. The first round involved asking them to come up with situations that might need first aid, and once completed, then come up with a specific treatment it called for. I then gave each group a card with a persona described on it, each with a different level of first aid training. On the back of these persona cards was a description of a situation. The groups were then asked to create a storyboard of how the persona would react. Now thinking about the lowest level of first aid training, I asked groups to think about potential ways technology could improve the outcome. After presenting these ideas, they had 30 minutes to come up with a paper prototype using the materials allocated. Group A focused on information architecture for users and then illustrated this through a mobile application, where Group B was more physical based and provided a creative prototype that demonstrated through role play as if they were experiencing this situation. On asking technology preferences to students were more inclined to use mobile devices. I then proceeded to create different sketches based on key features I wanted to implement in the final design. The users would create a profile, select first aid skills they would like to revise with the option to update them as they went along, test their knowledge based on different persona-based situations. The skill steps would always stay the same, the situations in which they used them would change. The ability to test these skills with friends, challenge each other to complete skill rounds the quickest, create a visual representation of how much these skills they've revised, and motivate them to keep revising. In order to organize the information for my final design, I completed a post-it note session. This involved elaborating on information needed in each key feature. Especially for the first aid revision features, I needed to use accurate, reliable first aid information. I contacted the Irish Red Cross unit in Limerick City and spoke to one of the staff members. They referred me to purchase their first aid response course book. This had all the information I needed in order to create the first aid steps needed for each situation. I then created persona-based situations. This was inspired heavily from the experiences discussed with students through the field studies. Each had a name, age, and what situation was currently happening. Once I had created the situation tasks and the relevant first aid steps, I asked 10 users to evaluate these. Some who had done first aid training recently, some who had done it in the past year. Under a time constraint of 60 seconds, I asked users to pick a first aid skill. They were then given 3 personas, situations, and told to put these first aid steps in order. They realized quickly that the more they completed the task, the easier it was to remember the steps the next round. I then created a low fidelity wireframe in order to test navigation, then chose a final color scheme for the application. I then did a round of A/B testing with students in order to come up with the final name, Cowroo, which means help in Irish. I then created a final logo. I then created the high fidelity prototype and asked for one final user evaluation. There was a few minor issues, but they were all amended. This then led to my final product. As you can see, I've shown some of the key feature screens, but these can be seen in more detail in my video prototype, which will be in my full report. Thank you so much for taking the time out to listen to my presentation. Please feel free to contact me with any questions in relation to my project. I look forward to hearing from you.